Good morning. I wrote a thread not too long ago about information architecture and a lot of the different sort of sources that brings perspective to something that I've been wanting to articulate for a while regarding living life and architecting it as pixels. So the first one that really stood out to me that prompted me to start talking about this in a thread was one of my friends, Michael. He started a journaling practice where every day he would fill in a square, drawing it at the beginning of the day and at the end of it starting to fill in the information that he felt as relevant to the day that had gone within like the previous 24 hours. And over the past few years, he had evolved from starting to notate information about, what he did that day, what exercise he did, and various other types of information that he felt like was relevant that would encapsulate a whole day. And it sort of evolved into this whole sort of comic book like structure where he would write past the margins. He almost developed an entire visual aesthetic that came with just putting things in squares. It sort of had broken the shackles of what he had originally planned on making with just a pixel a day, and just freed the reins of what was possible and what you can kind of put in a square beyond the limitations that he put on himself when he started this journaling practice. And I feel like that was really interesting. If you're watching this video right now, you probably have a bunch of pixels. That's me looking at myself. Each little pixel only really has three values, red, green, blue, and whatever sort of hue that you have from 0 to 255. That sort of makes that color, and then extrapolate that to a shit ton of pixels and you have an image. But for Michael, what he did, he started with a supposed limitation, his RGB, and eventually just sort of added more data, metadata involved with a single pixel. What else you can put beyond just the sort of sterile things that can come with a day, how many steps you've taken, or if you drank water that day, how many gallons you drank. And that really segues well into the second thing that I added into the thread. My friend Visa, he talks a lot about information architecture, and one particular thread that I really love that sort of encapsulates something that he hasn't really talked about lately, but I feel it would be really cool to mention again, is his bricks thesis, which is his idea of squares in digital formats. He wants to create a hyper remix of his love and use of Google Sheets, because he's an avid Google Sheets person, and the Roam graph view, which kind of links all these different nodes together and the connections that sort of form all of them. And then another mix of another friend, his name is Ollie. He made a note-taking app that kind of makes each note a little square, and then sort of puts them all together, similar to a graph view, but a little bit different. I guess the point that I'm trying to make is that thread, he sort of extrapolates that sort of same thing, where in the digital space, you have a lot more realm to work with metadata, beyond just sort of things that can come with analog space. You have supposedly no limitation with what you can do with pen and paper, as you can see with what Michael did. But with the digital space, it seems that there's a lot more free reign with what you can do in adding more metadata. He goes a little bit more into the thread, but I think the important information that he really wanted to drive home is this idea of a single pixel can really encapsulate so much of history, so much of information at one point, that when you sort of superimpose them with other pixels, the value of a single pixel really does matter. And that kind of leads into the third thing that I wanted to add into the thread, which is a really old blog post from Wait But Why about what I guess from what I said earlier about like living life in a pixel, he took a very narrative approach in talking about this, you know, with the classic wait but why style of like stick figures and crappy drawings. Very charming. The thing that really stuck out to me was like this visual image of very much like blurred, almost like impressionistic view of a life. And when zoomed out, you see all these like massive colors and smudges and painterly type figures. Whoop. I'm crossing the street. Okay, anyways. Of this whole life just in a single image. But when you zoom into it, you see like a single stick figure just like standing with a bunch of one singular colored pixel, and just like the framing of it, of when you zoom out and you see a whole life, you can see kind of where and what sort of image it kind of composes. But at any single moment in which you're living your life, you only really get a feeling of what pixel you live in, like right now, the day. And that's sort of like a really interesting limitation to think about, wherein you only really have today, like a now, to create the image that you want to make. And so realizing that it might be important to see like what other pixels you want to situate yourself in, like in the past, and collaborate. Oh, it's kind of like project management. I really found those particular images that I had in the thread like resonant in sort of communicating that message. You know, storytelling is a really important device, I find, in sort of taking these concepts into something that is more tangible, meaningful to people. And I feel like Tim does a really good job of doing that. Another person that does a really good job of doing that is another friend of mine on Twitter that is a comic book theorist, comic book writer. His name is Nick Sousanis. He has an amazing book called Unflattening. I would love to make a video about this in the future because that book is holy shit. A specific chapter stuck out to me in a narrative and he used a narrative device of kind of talking about a puppet going through the motions of his day-to-day life, and each moment within a day kind of taking a single panel or a single pixel, like within each page of the comic book, to sort of simulate just the routine that this puppet would go through, until he found a little caterpillar in his backyard that seemed to have sparked his curiosity. And so that prompted like the question of like, wow, what are the sort of like pixels that were important in sort of shaping the future, or the sort of image that someone wanted to construct, you know, leaving the pixel open toward like randomness, leaving it open to change, something that goes beyond like the routine of what sort of image that you find yourself constantly making with the sort of metadata that exists within a single pixel. One thing that I found was a sort of key pixel change. Oh, hello. Yep, no problem. I used to really love Post-it notes. So when I was in undergrad, I never really had like a good like note-taking routine. I normally just kept shit in my head. But after talking to a few friends, a couple of them introduced me to the concept of like Post-it notes, just like leave shit around. And a particular friend of mine, she would put whatever things that they wanted to do that day as like a list, and and sticky note that like onto the edge of their laptop, and that was just like a thing that helped them tremendously to keep track of whatever the heck they needed to do that day. And so I started to do that for my own stuff, and the sort of pixel like nature that comes with like post-it notes like really started to like, I didn't know it at the time, but I found that like really helpful in sort of making that things that, you know, were really part of my head, and just like putting that out. I've been using it in like a myriad of ways since. I would start to like do like little doodles, put them on the wall, try to make like a tapestry of stuff, but like it's all very manic and chaotic. I would keep those post-it notes though and like put them in my notebooks, and that ended up being like a sort of set of bookmarks or things that I wanted to keep behind. I didn't really put effort into sort of arranging them into a way that like made coherent sense, but I just liked how quick it was as like a method of communication for just putting things down. And since I had left my undergrad education, I never really used post-it notes since. I kind of like switched directly from analog to digital after like losing like a really dear and close to my heart like notebook, like handheld notebook that I wrote like incessantly in as like a journal for like the past 6 months, for like a pivotal 6 months of my life. That the amount of grief that I'd gone through in losing that like made me switch entirely to digital notes, and that led to another whole set of events. That's probably another pixel that sort of led me to being online more often and sort of putting shit out. But wow, holy shit. I want to go back into analog, and after going to CVS this morning, I found in the aisle like a package of post-it notes again, and like all this sort of emotion of wow, like this ideas of like pixels that I've been like circling around lately like sort of came full circle after seeing like wow, it's like physical, you can like adhere to it. I ended up having like this weird curiosity to sort of look into the history of post-it notes. So apparently like a 3M adhesive scientist was like really curious about like making a really strong adhesive, but it turned out that he ended up making a supremely weak adhesive that sort of you can remove it, but you can still sort of reattach it. And he found that to have like a really interesting use, but not finding like the right product to put it in. And then another, I think it was a product dude. I forget the names right now because I've been talking for like the past 13 minutes, so forgive me for that. He wanted to have like a product that could leave behind like little scraps of paper that would act as like notes for the choir that he was working with, and those two kind of like remix their ideas into creating like what is now the post-it note. And I think that was like really fascinating. All of that to say, the world of information architecture is so supremely interesting. I feel like I'm only really scratching the surface of what fascinates me about arranging things and packaging information in a way that makes some coherence with like an image, a story, a life, and putting it all together into something that, you know, amongst all the noise that you kind of come into, if you kind of zoom out, it becomes like a more coherent image than one might actually think. That's really all that I have time for. So, thank you for listening. See you soon.